My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I came face to face with a werewolf. I had always considered myself a rational person, someone who believed in science and logic. But the events that unfolded one summer night changed my perception of reality forever. It was late July, and my friends and I decided to go on a camping trip in Black Hollow Forest, a dense, remote woodland known for its beauty and eerie legends. There was Anna, a spirited adventurer with a passion for folklore. Mark, the skeptic who enjoyed debunking myths. And Lisa, a quiet but curious nature enthusiast. We set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by towering trees and the sounds of nature. As night fell, we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. The conversation inevitably turned to the local legends. Anna, always eager to delve into the supernatural, began recounting the tale of the Black Hollow werewolf. According to the legend, a man named Henry Blackwood had lived in the forest centuries ago. He was rumored to be a werewolf, cursed by a vengeful witch for a crime he never committed. On the nights of the full moon, he would transform into a monstrous beast, terrorizing anyone who dared to venture into his territory. The curse was said to continue through his bloodline, with his descendants doomed to the same fate. Mark scoffed at the story, dismissing it as nothing more than a myth. "There's no such thing as werewolves," he said. "It's just a way to scare people." Anna, unfazed, continued. "Legend has it that the only way to break the curse is to kill the werewolf with a silver bullet, made from the silverware of the Blackwood family." We laughed it off, enjoying the thrill of a good ghost story. But as the fire died down and we retreated to our tents, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. Around midnight, I woke to a chilling howl echoing through the forest. I sat up, my heart pounding. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard, deep, mournful, and filled with an eerie sense of longing. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, shivering as a cold breeze swept through the clearing. Anna was already outside, her eyes wide with excitement. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, glancing around nervously. Mark and Lisa soon joined us, both looking equally unsettled. "It's probably just a coyote," Mark said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. We decided to investigate, our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we ventured deeper into the forest. The howling grew louder, more distinct, and my apprehension grew with each step. The moon was full, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. As we approached a dense thicket, we heard rustling in the underbrush. We paused, holding our breath. Suddenly, a massive shape burst from the shadows, knocking Mark to the ground. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen, tall, with matted fur and glowing yellow eyes. It was a werewolf, just like in Anna's story. Panic set in, and we ran, the creature hot on our heels. We stumbled through the forest, branches scratching at our skin, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We reached a small cave and ducked inside, hoping the narrow entrance would keep the werewolf at bay. The creature snarled and scratched at the entrance, its claws scraping against the stone. We huddled together, terrified and unsure of what to do. Anna, always the brave one, whispered, "We need to find Silver. It's the only way to stop it." But where would we find Silver in the middle of the forest? Mark's skepticism had turned to fear, and he suggested we try to make a run for the car. But Lisa, ever the thinker, remembered a small antique shop we had passed on our way to the campsite. The owner had mentioned something about old silverware, passed down from the Blackwood family. We knew it was a long shot, but it was our only hope. We waited for the werewolf to retreat, then carefully made our way back to the campsite. The journey was fraught with danger, the werewolf's howls echoing in the distance. But we managed to reach the car and drive to the antique shop. The shop was closed, but desperate times called for desperate measures. We broke in, quickly locating the silverware. We melted it down in a makeshift forge we created with camping equipment, fashioning crude bullets from the molten metal. Armed with the silver bullets, we returned to the forest, our determination outweighing our fear. The werewolf was waiting for us, its eyes burning with rage and hunger. Mark, who had reluctantly taken the rifle, aimed and fired. The bullet struck the werewolf in the chest, and it let out a heart-wrenching howl. Its body convulsed, and it began to transform. Fur receded, and its monstrous features softened into those of a man. He looked at us with a mixture of relief and sorrow before collapsing to the ground. We stood in stunned silence, the reality of what we had just experienced sinking in. The curse was broken, but the cost was high. We later learned that the man was indeed a descendant of Henry Blackwood, cursed to live as a werewolf until someone had the courage to end his suffering. The authorities were skeptical of our story, but the evidence was undeniable. The man's identity and his connection to the Blackwood family were confirmed, and the legend of the Black Hollow werewolf was laid to rest. We returned home, forever changed by the experience. The forest, once a place of beauty and adventure, now held a darker significance. We had faced the unimaginable and survived, but the memories haunted us. My name is Laura, and this is the story of my encounter with the werewolf of Pine Hollow. It's an experience that changed my life forever and made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It was the fall of 2005, a crisp October evening when the leaves were just beginning to turn. I was a senior at Pine Hollow High School, a small town nestled in the dense woods of upstate New York. The town was quaint, with its charming main street and friendly residents, but it had a dark secret that few dared to speak of. For generations, there had been whispers of a creature that roamed the woods at night, a beast that was neither man nor animal. The old-timers called it a werewolf, but most of us dismissed it as nothing more than a scary story to keep kids from wandering into the forest after dark. Little did I know that the legend was all too real. I was on my way to a Halloween party at my friend Jenny's house, excited for a night of fun and laughter. I decided to take a shortcut through the woods, a path I had walked countless times during the day. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground, but I was confident I could make it to Jenny's before it got too dark. As I walked deeper into the woods, the familiar sounds of rustling leaves and chirping crickets filled the air. But soon, those sounds were replaced by an eerie silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, when suddenly, I heard a low growl. I stopped in my tracks, scanning the area with wide eyes. The growl came again, louder this time, and I knew I wasn't alone. Panic set in as I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. I was about to turn back when I saw a hulking figure emerging from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The creature stood on two legs, its body covered in coarse, dark fur. Its face was a grotesque mix of human and wolf, with sharp fangs and a snout that twitched as it sniffed the air. It was the werewolf of Pine Hollow, and it was staring right at me. Paralyzed with fear, I took a step back, but the werewolf lunged forward, closing the distance between us in an instant. I turned and ran, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. The creature was fast, but I was fueled by sheer terror, dodging trees and leaping over fallen branches as I tried to outrun it. I could hear its heavy breathing and the sound of its claws digging into the earth behind me. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, but I refused to stop. Just as I thought I couldn't go any further, I stumbled into a clearing and saw the lights of Jenny's house in the distance. With a final burst of energy, sprinted towards the house, screaming for help. The werewolf was right on my heels, its hot breath on my neck, but I made it to the porch and banged on the door. Jenny opened it just in time, pulling me inside and slamming it shut behind me. We locked the door and collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. The werewolf howled outside, scratching at the door, but it couldn't get in. Jenny's parents called the police, and soon, the sound of sirens filled the air. The creature disappeared into the woods before they arrived, leaving only deep gouges in the wooden porch as evidence of its presence. The police didn't believe my story at first, But when they saw the claw marks and the fear in my eyes, they knew something terrible had happened. They searched the woods but found no trace of the werewolf. The town was in an uproar, and a curfew was put in place to keep people indoors after dark. Over the next few weeks, more sightings were reported, each one more terrifying than the last. The werewolf seemed to be getting bolder, attacking livestock and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The town was on edge, and rumors began to spread about who or what could be behind the attacks. One night, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson approached me. He claimed to have information about the werewolf, something that had been passed down through his family for generations. Intrigued, I agreed to meet him at his cabin on the outskirts of town. Mr. Thompson was a grizzled old man, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He invited me into his home and began to tell his tale. According to him, the werewolf was the result of a curse placed on the town centuries ago by a vengeful witch. She had been wronged by the townsfolk and vowed to unleash a creature of darkness upon them. The curse could only be broken by an act of true bravery and sacrifice. Mr. Thompson believed that the werewolf was not a mindless beast, but a tormented soul trapped in a monstrous form. He told me that the creature had once been a man named William, a kind-hearted farmer who had disappeared many years ago. Determined to end the terror, I decided to confront the werewolf and try to free William from his curse. With Mr. Thompson's help, I prepared for the next full moon, gathering the necessary items for a ritual that would break the curse. We knew it was a long shot, but we had to try. The night of the full moon arrived, and I waited in the woods, armed with a silver dagger and a vial of holy water. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of leaves made my heart skip a beat. Finally, the werewolf appeared, its eyes glowing in the moonlight. I stepped forward, holding the dagger and holy water out in front of me. The werewolf growled, but there was a flicker of recognition in its eyes. I spoke to it, calling it by its human name, and for a moment, it seemed to hesitate. With a deep breath, I recited the incantation Mr. Thompson had taught me, pouring the holy water over the dagger. The werewolf howled in pain, its body convulsing as the curse fought against the ritual. But then, as if by some miracle, the transformation began. The beast's features softened, its fur receding as it fell to the ground. In its place was a man, battered and bruised, but alive. It was William, freed from the curse at last. He looked up at me with gratitude in his eyes, and I knew we had succeeded. The town was overjoyed when they heard the news. The werewolf attack ceased, and life slowly returned to normal. William was reunited with his family, and I was hailed as a hero. But the experience left a lasting mark on me, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of my encounter with the werewolf of Willow Creek. An event that turned my world upside down and left an indelible mark on my soul. It was the summer of 2008, a time when I was young and carefree. I had just finished my sophomore year of college and decided to spend the summer at my grandparents' house in Willow Creek, a quaint little town in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. The town was picturesque, with its rolling hills, dense forests, and a river that wound its way through the valley. It was the perfect place to unwind and escape the pressures of city life. My grandparents' house was a charming old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by acres of lush greenery. I spent my days exploring the woods, fishing in the river, and helping my grandparents with chores. It was a peaceful existence, but there was something unsettling about the area, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The locals often spoke in hushed tones about a creature that roamed the woods at night, a beast that was neither man nor animal. They called it the Willow Creek werewolf, and it had been the subject of countless stories and legends. Most people dismissed it as folklore, but there was a palpable fear in their eyes when they spoke of it. One evening, I decided to go for a hike in the woods. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. and the air was filled with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. I had hiked this trail many times before, and knew it like the back of my hand. However, as the shadows lengthened and the forest grew darker, I began to feel a sense of unease. I quickened my pace, hoping to make it back to the house before nightfall. But as I rounded a bend in the trail, I heard a low growl. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and scanned the area for the source of the sound. My eyes landed on a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the underbrush. The creature stepped into the open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The werewolf was enormous, standing at least 7 feet tall, with a muscular frame covered in dark, matted fur. Its face was a horrifying blend of human and wolf, with sharp fangs and a snout that twitched as it sniffed the air. Its eyes were a piercing yellow, filled with an intelligence that was both unsettling and terrifying. I backed away slowly, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. The werewolf growled again, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. I turned and ran, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I sprinted down the trail. The creature gave chase, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth behind me. I could hear its ragged breathing and the sound of its claws tearing through the underbrush. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they would give out at any moment, but I pushed myself to keep going. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I stumbled into a clearing and saw the lights of my grandparents' house in the distance. My name is Emma, and this is the story of my terrifying encounter with the beast of Bray Road. Growing up in a small town in Wisconsin, I had heard the legends about this creature all my life, but I never believed them until that fateful night. It was late October 2012, just before Halloween. The air was crisp, and the trees were ablaze with autumn colors. I was a senior in high school, and my friends and I decided to drive out to Bray Road for a bit of fun. The road was infamous in our town, known for its eerie atmosphere and the countless stories of a mysterious creature lurking in the shadows. That night, it was just me, my best friend Sarah, and our friend Jake. We piled into Jake's old pickup truck, armed with flashlights and a healthy dose of skepticism. The moon was full, casting an otherworldly glow over the landscape as we drove out of town and onto Bray Road. We laughed and joked, trying to scare each other with tales of the beast. Sarah told a particularly gruesome story about a local farmer who claimed to have seen the creature tearing apart his livestock. Jake chimed in with his own account of a couple who had encountered the beast while camping in the woods. Despite the spooky stories, I felt safe with my friends. We had been inseparable since childhood, and I knew we would look out for each other. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the road became narrower and more isolated. The trees closed in around us, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Jake parked the truck on the side of the road, and we got out to explore. The night was silent, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. We wandered along the edge of the woods, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. After a while, we found a clearing and decided to take a break. We sat in a circle, passing around a thermos of hot cocoa and talking about school, our future plans, and everything in between. It was a peaceful moment, and for a brief time, I forgot about the legends and the fear they inspired. But then, we heard a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. We froze, our eyes wide with fear. The growl came again, louder this time, and it was followed by the sound of something moving through the underbrush. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Yeah," Jake replied, his face pale in the moonlight. "We should get back to the truck." We stood up, our flashlights darting around the clearing. The growl came again, and I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring at us from the edge of the woods. The creature stepped into the light, and my heart skipped a beat. It was massive, standing at least 6 feet tall on its hind legs. Its body was covered in dark, matted fur, and its face was a grotesque mix of human and wolf. Sharp fangs glinted in the moonlight, and its eyes burned with an unnatural intensity. This was the beast of Bray Road, and it was real. We backed away slowly, trying not to provoke it, but the beast let out a deafening roar and lunged at us. We screamed and ran for the truck, our hearts pounding in our chests. I could hear the beast's heavy footsteps behind us, and I prayed we would make it in time. Jake fumbled with the keys as we reached the truck. The beast was almost upon us when he finally got the door open. We scrambled inside, slamming the doors shut just as the creature reached us. It clawed at the windows, its eyes filled with rage and hunger. Jake started the engine and floored the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, and the beast let out a furious howl. We sped down Bray Road, the creature chasing us for what felt like an eternity before it finally gave up and disappeared into the darkness. We didn't stop driving until we were back in town, safe and sound. We were shaken and terrified, but we were alive. We never spoke about that night again, but the memory of the beast haunted us for years. Life went on, and I eventually moved away from our small town. But every time I come back to visit, I can't help but think about the beast of Bray Road and the night we came face to face with it. It's a reminder that some legends are more than just stories, they are warnings, meant to keep us safe from the things that go bump in the night. And as much as I try to forget, I'll never be able to erase the image of those glowing eyes and the sound of that bone-chilling growl. The beast of Bray Road is real, and it's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. So, if you ever find yourself on Bray Road on a dark and moonlit night, remember my story and heed my warning. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and never underestimate the power of a legend. Because sometimes, the things we fear most are the things we can't see. Monsters that hide in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My name is David, and what I'm about to share with you is the most horrifying experience of my life. It all started in the small, unassuming town of Northwood, nestled in the heart of Maine. Northwood was known for its dense forests and serene lakes, a perfect retreat for those seeking peace and solitude. But beneath its tranquil exterior lay a dark secret that would change my life forever. I had recently moved to Northwood to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. My job as a freelance writer allowed me the flexibility to work from anywhere. And I had always dreamed of living in a place surrounded by nature. The town was perfect, and I quickly settled into my new routine. One evening, decided to take a walk through the woods. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled my nostrils. I followed a narrow trail that wound its way through the trees, lost in the beauty of my surroundings. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The forest grew eerily silent, and the usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were replaced by an oppressive stillness. A shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. I continued along the path, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. I had been walking for about an hour when I came across an old, abandoned cabin. It was dilapidated, with broken windows and a sagging roof. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a closer look. As I approached the cabin, I noticed deep claw marks on the wooden door, as if some large animal had tried to break it. My heart raced as I peered through one of the broken windows. The interior was dark and covered in dust, with old furniture scattered about. I was about to turn away when I heard a low growl behind me. I froze, my blood running cold. Slowly, I turned around, and what I saw nearly made me collapse in fear. Standing a few feet away was a massive creature, unlike anything I had ever seen. It stood on two legs, towering over me at nearly 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent yellow light. Sharp fangs protruded from its snout, and its claws were long and razor-sharp. It was a werewolf, and it was real. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear. The creature snarled, and I could see its muscles tensing as it prepared to attack. My instincts kicked in, and I turned and ran as fast as I could. The forest was a blur as I sprinted down the path, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the werewolf's heavy footsteps behind me, gaining on me with terrifying speed. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against the rough ground. The werewolf was almost upon me, its hot breath on my neck. Desperation surged through me, and I scrambled to my feet, bolting toward the cabin. I reached the door and slammed it shut just as the creature lunged at me. The door shuddered under the impact, but it held. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the door. The werewolf growled and scratched at the wood, trying to force its way in. My mind raced as I searched for a way to defend myself. I spotted an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall and grabbed it, my hands shaking. I had never fired a gun before, but I had no other choice. The werewolf continued its assault on the door, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke through. I took a deep breath and aimed the rifle at the door. The creature let out a deafening roar, and finally burst through, splintering the wood. I pulled the trigger, and the gunshot echoed through the cabin. The bullet struck the werewolf in the shoulder, and it howled in pain. It staggered back, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it seemed to grow even more enraged. I fired again, this time hitting it in the chest. The werewolf let out a final, agonized cry and collapsed to the floor, its body convulsing before it lay still. I stood there, my hand still gripping the rifle, unable to believe what had just happened. The werewolf was dead, but the reality of the situation was overwhelming. I had killed a creature that shouldn't exist, a monster from legends and nightmares. My mind struggled to process it all as I slowly lowered the rifle. I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin. The sound of the gunshots would surely attract attention, and I didn't want to be found with a dead werewolf in an abandoned cabin. I stumbled out into the night, my legs weak and my heart still racing. I made my way back to town, trying to stay as quiet as possible. When I finally reached my house, I locked the doors and collapsed onto the couch. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I didn't know what to do or who to tell. Would anyone even believe me? I decided to keep the encounter to myself, at least for the time being. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to return to my normal life. But I couldn't escape the memories of that night. The werewolf haunted my dreams, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those glowing yellow eyes. The fear never truly left me. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch, I heard a rustling in the bushes. My heart skipped a beat, and I grabbed a flashlight, shining it into the darkness. To my relief, it was just a deer. But as I watched it disappear into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I realized that the werewolf's death might not have been the end. What if there were more out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? The thought chilled me to the bone. I knew I couldn't live in constant fear, but I also couldn't ignore the possibility. I decided to do some research, hoping to find answers about the werewolf and its origins. I spent hours poring over old books and online articles, learning everything I could about lycanthropy and the legends surrounding it. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that Northwood held deeper secrets than I had ever imagined. One day, while digging through the local library's archives, I came across a series of old newspaper articles from the early 1900s. They detailed a string of mysterious attacks in the area, all attributed to a wild beast that matched the description of the werewolf I had encountered. The attacks had eventually stopped, but the creature had never been found. I also discovered that Northwood had a long history of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. There were stories of missing persons, bizarre animal mutilations, and sightings of other cryptid creatures. It seemed that my encounter with the werewolf was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. With this newfound knowledge, I decided to take action. I couldn't live in fear any longer, and I needed to find out if there were more werewolves or other creatures lurking in the woods. I reached out to a local group of paranormal investigators, hoping they could help me uncover the truth. The investigators, led by a woman named Lisa, were intrigued by my story. They had been studying the strange happenings in Northwood for years, and believed that the town was a hotspot for supernatural activity. Together, we devised a plan to explore the woods and gather evidence of any other creatures that might be out there. Armed with cameras, recording equipment, and other tools, we set out one night to search the forest. The air was thick with tension as we made our way along the same path I had taken the night of my encounter. We followed the trail to the abandoned cabin, where the investigators set up their equipment. Hours passed as we waited in the darkness, our senses on high alert. Just when it seemed like nothing would happen, we heard a distant howl. My heart raced as the sound grew closer, and I could see the fear in the eyes of my companions. We braced ourselves, ready for whatever might come. Suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees. It wasn't a werewolf, but something equally terrifying, a massive, hulking creature with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. The investigators scrambled to capture footage, but the creature moved with unnatural speed, disappearing back into the woods before we could get a clear look. We spent the rest of the night on edge, but there were no more sightings. The encounter left us with more questions than answers, and the evidence we gathered was inconclusive at best. But it confirmed one thing: Northwood was indeed a place of dark and dangerous secrets. In the weeks that followed, the paranormal investigators continued their research, and I remained vigilant. I knew that the threat was still out there, lurking in the shadows. But I also knew that I couldn't let fear control my life. I had to be strong, for myself and for the people of Northwood. My encounter with the werewolf had changed me in ways I couldn't fully understand. It had opened my eyes to a world of darkness and danger, but it had also shown me the importance of courage and resilience. No matter what lay ahead, I was determined to face it head on. My name is Sarah, and I've always been a skeptic. Raised in a world of science and reason, I never gave much thought to the supernatural. That was until I moved to the small town of Moonlit Creek, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. What I'm about to share with you is a story that shattered my understanding of reality and left me forever changed. It all began when I inherited my grandmother's old house. Nestled at the edge of Moonlit Creek, the house was charming but isolated, surrounded by dense forests and a winding creek that gave the town its name. I decided to move there, seeking solace after a particularly rough year. The townsfolk were friendly enough, though they seemed wary of the woods. They often spoke in hushed tones about the curse of Moonlit Creek, but I dismissed it as local folklore. My days were spent renovating the house and exploring the picturesque surroundings. It was during one of these explorations that I first heard the rumors about the werewolf. Mrs. Whitaker, my elderly neighbor, was the one who told me. She was a kind woman with a penchant for storytelling, and she seemed genuinely concerned for my safety. "Beware the full moon, dear," she warned. "That's when the beast comes out. The curse of Moonlit Creek has taken many lives over the years. Stay indoors when the moon is full, and keep your windows and doors locked tight." I smiled politely and thanked her for the advice, though I didn't take it seriously. A werewolf? It was the stuff of nightmares and horror movies, not something that existed in the real world. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. One night, as the full moon rose high in the sky, I decided to take a walk along the creek. The moonlight bathed the landscape in a silvery glow, and the air was crisp and cool. I followed the path along the water, enjoying the tranquility. That's when I heard a low, guttural growl coming from the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned toward the sound, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A pair of glowing yellow eyes stared back at me from the darkness. The creature stepped into the moonlight, revealing its massive, hulking form. It stood on two legs, covered in thick, matted fur, with sharp fangs glistening in the light. It was a werewolf, and it was real. Panic surged through me, and I turned and ran as fast as I could. The beast let out a deafening howl and gave chase. I could hear its heavy footsteps behind me, gaining on me with terrifying speed. My lungs burned as I sprinted back to the house, my mind racing. I reached the door and slammed it shut, locking it just as the werewolf crashed into it with a thunderous impact. I backed away, trembling, as the creature clawed at the door, trying to break in. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something to defend myself with. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The werewolf's snarls grew louder, more desperate, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it got through. Just when I thought all hope was lost, the creature suddenly stopped. There was a moment of eerie silence, followed by the sound of footsteps retreating into the night. I waited, too scared to move, until I was certain it was gone. Exhausted and terrified, I collapsed onto the floor, my mind reeling from the encounter. The next morning, I went to see Mrs. Whitaker. I needed answers. She greeted me with a knowing look, as if she had expected me. "The curse is real, isn't it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded solemnly. "It is, dear. The werewolf has been a part of Moonlit Creek's history for generations. No one knows where it came from, but it appears every full moon, hunting for prey. Many have tried to kill it, but none have succeeded. How do we stop it?" I demanded, desperate for a solution. Mrs. Whitaker sighed. "There is a legend, an old one, that speaks of a way to break the curse. It is said that the werewolf can only be killed by a weapon forged from silver, blessed by a holy man. But such a weapon is not easily found, and many have lost their lives trying to obtain it. I was determined to end the nightmare. I couldn't live in constant fear, and I couldn't let the werewolf continue to terrorize the town. I decided to seek out the weapon, no matter the cost. I began researching, speaking to anyone who might have information. The search led me to a small, remote village miles away, where I found a blacksmith named Elias who specialized in silverwork. Elias was a grizzled old man with a wealth of knowledge about the supernatural. He listened to my story with a grave expression, and agreed to help me. He crafted a silver dagger, inscribed with ancient runes, and instructed me to take it to the local priest for a blessing. Father Thomas, the priest, was initially skeptical, but agreed to perform the blessing after hearing my tale. He warned me that the road ahead would be dangerous, and urged me to be cautious. With the dagger in hand, I returned to Moonlit Creek, ready to face the werewolf once more. The next full moon came quickly, and I prepared myself for the confrontation. I fortified the house, ensuring every window and door was securely locked. I kept the silver dagger close, my heart pounding with anticipation. As the moon rose, the forest grew eerily silent, and I knew the werewolf was near. It didn't take long for the creature to find me. The werewolf's howls echoed through the night, sending chills down my spine. It appeared at the edge of the clearing, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I gripped the dagger tightly, steeling myself for the fight. The beast lunged at me, its claws slashing through the air. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its attack. With a swift motion, I plunged the silver dagger into its side. The werewolf let out a roar of pain, thrashing violently as it tried to dislodge the weapon. I held on, using all my strength to keep the dagger in place. The creature's movements grew weaker, and I could see the life draining from its eyes. With one final, desperate lunge, the werewolf collapsed to the ground, its body convulsing before it lay still. I stood there, panting, the dagger still clutched in my hand. It was over. The curse of Moonlit Creek had been broken. The townsfolk were elated when they heard the news. They celebrated the end of the werewolf's reign of terror, and I became somewhat of a local hero. But the experience had changed me. I couldn't forget the fear and the horror of that night, and I knew that the world was far more mysterious and dangerous than I had ever imagined. I decided to stay in Moonlit Creek, using my knowledge and skills to help protect the town from any future threats. The werewolf might be gone, but there were still many unknowns lurking in the shadows. And as long as I was there, I would do everything in my power to keep the people of Moonlit Creek safe. Life slowly returned to normal, but I remained vigilant. The memory of the werewolf and the curse it brought with it was a constant reminder of the darkness that could exist in the most unexpected places. My journey from skeptic to believer had been a harrowing one, but it had also made me stronger, more resilient. I continued to explore the supernatural, learning all I could about the creatures and curses that plagued our world. The experience had opened my eyes to a reality I had never known, and I was determined to face it head-on. No longer a skeptic, I had become a guardian, a protector of those who couldn't defend themselves. And so, the story of the werewolf of Moonlit Creek came to an end. But the legacy of that night lived on, in the hearts and minds of the townsfolk, and in my own resolve to confront the unknown. The darkness may still be out there, but I was ready to face it, armed with knowledge, courage, and a silver dagger. My name is Jack, and I've spent my entire life surrounded by the endless trees of Montana. My family has lived on the same piece of land for generations, and I've grown up hearing tales of the strange and unexplained. Most of these stories were nothing more than campfire lore, meant to scare children and entertain visitors. However, one encounter changed everything for me and left an indelible mark on our family history. It began one autumn when my sister Emily and I decided to go camping in the woods behind our house. The forest was dense and mysterious, full of towering pines and winding trails. We had been camping there countless times before, but this time felt different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a quiet that seemed almost unnatural. We set up our campsite near a small clearing and built a fire as the sun dipped below the horizon. The night was chilly, and we huddled close to the flames, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Emily, always the brave one, decided to venture a little further into the woods to gather more firewood. She left with a flashlight and a confident smile, promising to be back soon. As the minutes turned into an hour, I began to worry. Emily was usually quick and efficient, and it wasn't like her to wander off. I called out her name, but only the rustling of leaves responded. Grabbing my flashlight, I followed the path she had taken, my heart pounding with every step. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing twisted branches and shifting shadows. Suddenly, I heard a low growl, sending chills down my spine. I quickened my pace, calling out for Emily. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and I felt a presence closing in on me. Just as I was about to turn back, I saw her. Emily was standing still, her back to me, staring into the darkness. I called her name again, and she slowly turned around, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. Before I could ask what was wrong, I saw it. A massive, hulking figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was a werewolf, unlike anything I had ever seen. Its fur was dark and matted, its fangs bared in a snarl. The creature stood on two legs, towering over us, exuding an aura of pure menace. I grabbed Emily's hand and we ran, our footsteps echoing through the forest as the werewolf pursued us. We reached the campsite, and I grabbed a burning log from the fire, brandishing it as a weapon. The werewolf hesitated, its eyes locked on the flames. It growled, a deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. With a final, menacing glare, it retreated into the darkness, leaving us trembling and terrified. We quickly packed up our belongings and made our way back to the house. Our parents were waiting for us, their faces filled with worry. We told them what had happened, and their expressions turned grim. My father, a stern and practical man, admitted that he had heard stories of the werewolf, but had always dismissed them as mere legend. Determined to protect our family, my father sought the help of an old friend, Dr. William Harlow, a renowned cryptozoologist with a deep knowledge of mythical creatures. Dr. Harlow arrived a few days later, armed with books, equipment, and a determination to uncover the truth. He listened to our account of the encounter and examined the area where we had seen the werewolf. His findings were unsettling. He found large, clawed footprints and traces of fur that were unlike any known animal. Dr. Harlow explained that the werewolf was likely a result of a curse, a dark magic that had plagued the land for centuries. To break the curse, he said, we needed to find the source of the werewolf's Poera talisman hidden deep within the forest. It was a risky endeavor, but we had no choice. The werewolf posed a threat to our family and the entire community. Armed with silver weapons and guided by Dr. Harlow's expertise, we ventured into the forest once more. The journey was arduous, and the sense of dread grew with each step. We followed the trail of clues Dr. Harlow had pieced together, leading us to a hidden cave. Inside the cave, we found ancient runes and symbols carved into the walls. At the center of the cave was an altar, upon which lay the talisman, a grotesque amulet pulsing with a malevolent energy. As we approached, the werewolf appeared, more ferocious than ever. It guarded the talisman, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. A fierce battle ensued. The werewolf was incredibly strong and fast, but we fought with everything we had. Using the silver weapons, we managed to wound the creature, weakening it enough for Dr. Harlow to seize the talisman. With a final, desperate lunge, the werewolf collapsed, its body convulsing before it disintegrated into ash. The curse was broken, the talisman's power dissipated, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. We returned home, exhausted, but victorious. Dr. Harlow took the talisman with him, ensuring it would never again be used for evil. The werewolf was gone, but the memory of that night stayed with us. We had faced a darkness beyond comprehension and emerged stronger for it. Our family's bond grew tighter, and the legend of the werewolf of Moonlit Creek became a tale of bravery and resilience. As for me, I learned that some legends hold more truth than we'd like to believe. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the line between reality and myth is thinner than we think. But no matter what comes our way, I know that we can face it together, armed with courage and the strength of our shared experiences. My name is Sarah, and I grew up in a small, secluded town nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains. The town of Oak Ridge was a place where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The forests surrounding Oak Ridge were dense and mysterious, filled with legends and folklore passed down through generations. One such legend was that of the werewolves. According to the stories, a pack of werewolves roamed the mountains, emerging only under the full moon to hunt. These tales were often told around campfires and at local gatherings, but no one truly believed them until one fateful night. It was late October, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. The town was preparing for the annual Harvest Festival, a time of celebration and community. I was helping my parents set up our booth at the festival when I noticed something strange. There was a tension in the air, an unease that seemed to permeate the town. My best friend, Ethan, noticed it too. We had grown up together, exploring the forests and learning the secrets of the mountains. That night, we decided to venture into the woods to investigate. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, we set off on one of the old trails that led deep into the forest. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, but there was something different in the air, a feeling of being watched. We pressed on, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, when we heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down our spines. Ethan and I froze, our hearts pounding. The growl grew louder, closer, and suddenly, we saw them. A pack of werewolves, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, emerged from the shadows. They were massive, their fur bristling and fangs bared. Panic surged through us, and we turned to run. We raced through the forest, the werewolves hot on our heels. The trees blurred as we sprinted, our breath coming in ragged gasps. Just as we thought we might escape, Ethan stumbled and fell. I turned back to help him, but the werewolves were already upon us. In a desperate attempt to defend ourselves, we swung our flashlights at the creatures, but it was no use. Just when all seemed lost, a figure appeared out of the darkness. It was an old woman, her hair silver, and eyes sharp with wisdom. She carried a staff adorned with symbols and runes. With a commanding voice, she chanted words in a language I couldn't understand. The werewolves hesitated, their growls turning to whimpers as they retreated into the shadows. The woman introduced herself as Eliza, a guardian of the forest and keeper of its ancient secrets. She explained that the werewolves were once human, cursed by a dark magic that had plagued the mountains for centuries. The only way to break the curse was to find the source of the magic and destroy it. Eliza led us to a hidden grove deep within the forest. The grove was filled with ancient stones, each one etched with runes and symbols. At the center was a large stone altar, upon which lay an amulet, pulsing with a malevolent energy. This was the source of the curse. As we approached the altar, the werewolves reappeared, more ferocious than before. They seemed determined to protect the amulet at all costs. A fierce battle ensued, with Eliza using her staff to cast protective spells, while Ethan and I fought off the werewolves with everything we had. Despite our efforts, the werewolves were relentless. It wasn't until Eliza performed a powerful incantation that the tide began to turn. The amulet glowed brightly before shattering into pieces, releasing a wave of energy that knocked the werewolves back. They howled in pain before collapsing to the ground. As the dust settled, the werewolves began to transform. Their fur receded, their bodies shrinking and changing until they were human once more. The curse was broken. The men and women who had once been werewolves lay unconscious but alive, free from the dark magic that had controlled them. Eliza explained that the amulet had been created by a powerful sorcerer long ago, meant to control the inhabitants of the mountains. With the amulet destroyed, the curse was lifted and the forest could finally be at peace. We helped the former werewolves back to the town, where they were met with shock and relief. The townspeople had believed them lost to the forest, but now they were returned, free from the curse. The Harvest Festival became a celebration of not just the season, but of the newfound peace in the mountains. Ethan and I became local heroes, our story told and retold as a testament to bravery and the power of friendship. Eliza returned to her guardianship of the forest, a watchful protector of its secrets. And as for me, I learned that sometimes, the legends and tales we hear hold a kernel of truth. The world is full of mysteries, and it's up to us to uncover and protect them. The werewolves of Oak Ridge were no longer a threat, but their story served as a reminder of the power of the unknown and the importance of standing together in the face of darkness. The forest, once a place of fear, became a symbol of resilience and hope, a testament to the strength of our community and the enduring spirit of the mountains. My name is Jack, and I've always been drawn to the supernatural. Growing up, I devoured every book and movie about ghosts, monsters, and cryptids that I could find. So, when I heard about the eerie howls echoing through the hollow, I knew I had to investigate. Hollow Creek was a small, isolated town surrounded by dense forest and steep hills. The locals were tight-lipped about the howls, brushing off questions with nervous laughter or abrupt changes of subject. But the story's persistent people claimed to hear mournful wails at night. And some even swore they'd seen a creature stalking the woods under the full moon. I arrived in Hollow Creek just before dusk. The air was cool and crisp, the trees casting long shadows across the dirt road that led into town. I checked into a small bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker. They were friendly enough, but when I mentioned the howls, their expressions turned grave. "You don't want to go looking for trouble, young man," Mrs. Whitaker said, her voice tinged with concern. "The hollow isn't safe at night." Mr. Whitaker nodded in agreement. "People have gone missing. Best to stay indoors after dark. I thanked them for their advice, but resolved to find out what was really going on. That night, armed with a flashlight and my trusty camera, I set out into the woods. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Hours passed without incident, and I began to wonder if the stories were just that, stories. But then, just as I was about to turn back, I heard it, a long, mournful howl that sent chills down my spine. I froze, straining to pinpoint the source of the sound. It came again, closer this time, and I knew I was on the right track. I moved cautiously, keeping my flashlight low to avoid drawing attention. The howls grew louder, more insistent, and soon I found myself at the edge of a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and its door hanging askew. The howls seemed to be coming from within. Taking a deep breath, I approached the cabin. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, revealing a room filled with dust and cobwebs. The howls echoed through the cabin, and I followed the sound to a trapdoor in the floor. With a sense of foreboding, I lifted the door and descended into the darkness below. The basement was cold and damp, the air heavy with the scent of mold. I moved slowly, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then I saw a figure hunched in the corner, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The creature was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, with matted fur and elongated limbs. Its eyes were a deep, piercing yellow, and its mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. It let out another howl, this one filled with pain and sorrow. And I realized that it was trapped, chained to the wall by thick iron shackles. Summoning my courage, I approached the creature. It watched me with wary eyes, but made no move to attack. As I got closer, I saw that the chains were old and rusted, and the creature's fur was matted with dried blood. Someone had imprisoned it here, but why? I fumbled with the chains, trying to free the creature. It took several minutes of effort, but finally, the last shackle fell away. The creature stood slowly, stretching its limbs and shaking off the remnants of its bonds. It looked at me for a long moment, and I held my breath, unsure of what would happen next. Then, to my surprise, the creature nodded once, a gesture of gratitude, before turning and disappearing into the shadows. I stood there for a moment, stunned by what I had just witnessed. The howls had stopped, and the forest was silent once more. I returned to the bed and breakfast, my mind racing with questions. Who had chained the creature in the cabin? And why? The Whitakers were waiting for me when I arrived, their faces etched with worry. "You're lucky to be alive, mister," Whitaker said, relief evident in his voice. "Not many who go into the hollow at night come back." I told them what I had seen, and their expressions grew somber. "Mrs. Whitaker sighed. The creature you saw is a werewolf. It's been in these woods for generations, cursed to roam the night. It's said that the curse can only be broken if someone frees it willingly. I had freed the werewolf, and in doing so, I hoped I had ended its torment." The Whitakers thanked me, their gratitude evident, but I could see the lingering fear in their eyes. The werewolf was free, but the woods would never be the same. As I left Hollow Creek the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only scratched the surface of the town's mysteries. The werewolf was gone, but the forest still held secrets, and the legends of the Hollow would continue to haunt the town for generations to come. The experience left me with a deep respect for the unknown, and a realization that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. The howls of the Hollow had ceased, but the memory of that night would stay with me forever, a reminder of the thin line between reality and legend. I'm Angela, a journalist with a knack for uncovering the truth behind local legends. My latest assignment took me to a small town in Wisconsin, where the locals whispered about a terrifying creature known as the Beast of Bray Road. Sightings of this cryptid had been reported for decades, and I was determined to find out if there was any truth to the tales. Bray Road was a narrow, winding stretch of pavement cutting through dense forests and farmlands. The area had an eerie charm, with mist often rolling in from the fields, adding an air of mystery. I arrived in the early afternoon, hoping to interview some of the townspeople who had claimed to see the beast. My first stop was the local diner, a quaint little place where everyone seemed to know each other. I introduced myself to the owner, an elderly woman named Betty, and asked if she knew anyone who had seen the beast. Betty leaned in, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "You're not the first to come here looking for the beast," she said. "Most folks around here don't like to talk about it, but I've heard plenty of stories." She directed me to a farmer named Earl, who lived on the outskirts of town. Earl was a grizzled man in his 60s, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He greeted me with a wary nod, but his demeanor softened when I mentioned my interest in the beast. "I've seen it," Earl said, his voice low. "Years ago, when I was out late one night. It was big, real big, with glowing red eyes and fur as dark as midnight. It moved like nothing I've ever seen before." He described how the creature had crossed the road in front of his truck, its movements eerily smooth and almost human-like. Earl had been too frightened to follow it, but the encounter had left a lasting impression. I spent the rest of the day interviewing others who claimed to have seen the beast. Their stories varied in detail, but the general description remained consistent. A large, wolf-like creature with piercing eyes and an unsettling presence. As night fell, I decided it was time to venture out to Bray Road myself. Armed with a camera, a flashlight, and a sense of determination, I set out along the dark road. The forest loomed on either side, the trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. I walked slowly, listening for any signs of movement. The night was eerily silent, the only sounds the crunch of gravel under my feet and the distant call of an owl. Hours passed without incident, and I began to wonder if the beast was just a figment of the town's collective imagination. But then, just as I was about to give up and head back, I heard a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. I turned, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, at the edge of the road, stood a figure. It was tall and hunched, with eyes that glowed red in the light. My heart pounded as I realized I was looking at the beast. The creature growled again, baring its teeth. I took a step back, my hands shaking. But instead of attacking, the beast turned and lopped off into the woods, its movements fluid and almost graceful. I stood there, stunned, before finally gathering the courage to follow. The forest was thick and dark, but I pressed on, determined to capture proof of the beast's existence. The creature moved quickly, but I managed to keep up, my flashlight guiding the way. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged into a small clearing. There, in the center of the clearing, the beast stood, illuminated by the moonlight. It was even more terrifying up close, its fur matted and its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. But as I watched, something strange happened. The beast began to change. Its fur receded, its limbs shortening and its posture straightening. Within moments, the creature had transformed into a man, a tall, muscular figure with dark hair and piercing eyes. He looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "This is not your place." I was too shocked to respond. The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The beast of Bray Road is not what you think. It's a curse, one that I've been trying to break for years." He explained that he had been cursed by a vengeful spirit, doomed to transform into the beast under the full moon. The townspeople's fear and hatred only fueled the curse, making it stronger. He had hoped to find a way to lift it, but so far, all his efforts had been in vain. As he spoke, I felt a pang of sympathy. The man was trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape. I asked if there was anything I could do to help. He shook his head. "There's nothing anyone can do. I've tried everything. The curse is too powerful." I wanted to argue, to offer some glimmer of hope, but the man's expression told me it was futile. He turned away, his form beginning to shift once more. Within moments, the beast stood before me again, his eyes filled with an unmistakable sadness. The creature let out a mournful howl before disappearing into the woods. I stood there for a long time, the events of the night replaying in my mind. The beast of Bray Road was real, but it was also a victim, a man trapped in a cycle of pain and fear. I returned to town, my thoughts heavy. I shared my story with Betty and Earl, their reactions a mix of disbelief and awe. The legend of the beast would continue, but now I understood the truth behind the tales. As I left Bray Road behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something extraordinary. The beast was out there, a living reminder of the mysteries that still linger in the shadows. And while I couldn't break the curse, I hoped that my story would bring understanding and compassion to those who lived in fear of the unknown. I'm Henry, a historian with a passion for the supernatural. My research had led me to countless towns and remote locations, each with its own dark legends. My latest journey brought me to a small village in Romania, known for its ancient folklore and eerie tales of werewolves. The village was nestled in the Carpathian Mountains, a place shrouded in mist and mystery. I arrived in the village just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. The air was crisp, and a chill ran down my spine as I took in the old-world charm of the place. I had come to investigate the legend of the Blood Moon's curse, a tale that had been passed down through generations. According to the legend, every 100 years, a blood moon would rise, and with it, the curse of the werewolf would awaken. Those who were cursed would transform into beasts, hunting the villagers under the crimson light of the moon. The last blood moon had risen a century ago, and now, the villagers feared that the curse would return. I had arranged to stay with the local family, the Petrescus, who had lived in the village for generations. They welcomed me warmly, though their faces were etched with worry. Maria, the matriarch of the family, explained the history of the curse over a hearty meal of traditional Romanian dishes. My great-grandfather told me stories of the last blood moon, Maria said, her voice tinged with fear. He saw the beasts with his own eyes, their eyes glowing red, and their howls echoing through the night. Many villagers were lost to the curse, and those who survived lived in fear for the rest of their lives. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard similar tales in my travels, but something about Maria's account felt more immediate, more real. I decided to explore the village and its surroundings the next day, hoping to uncover any clues about the curse. The village was surrounded by dense forests, and I ventured into the woods, my notebook and camera at the ready. The trees were tall and ancient, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. As I walked, I felt an unsettling presence, as if I were being watched. I stumbled upon an old, abandoned chapel deep in the forest. Its walls were covered in ivy, and the roof had partially collapsed. Inside, I found faded murals depicting scenes of transformation and horror. The altar was adorned with symbols I recognized from my study, symbols of protection and warding off evil. As I was examining the chapel, I heard a rustling sound outside. I turned to see a young woman, her eyes wide with fear. She introduced herself as Elena, a villager who had come to the chapel seeking solace. "You shouldn't be here," Elena said urgently. "The curse is real, and it's coming. You need to leave before it's too late." Her words were a stark contrast to the warm welcome I had received from the Petrescus. I asked her to explain, and she told me about her brother, Ian, who had been the first to show signs of the curse. He had disappeared into the woods a few nights ago, and Elena feared he had succumbed to the transformation. Determined to help, I asked Elena to take me to the place where Idont was last seen. We ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere growing darker and more oppressive. As night fell, we heard the distant howls of wolves, a sound that seemed to resonate with an unnatural intensity. We reached a clearing where we found Ian, huddled and trembling. His eyes were wild, and his skin was marked with strange, jagged scars. He looked at us with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Help me," he pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. "The moon, it's calling me." Elena rushed to her brother's side, but I could see that the curse was already taking hold. Ian's body convulsed, and he let out a guttural growl. His transformation was beginning. I realized that we needed to act quickly. I had studied ancient rituals and protective spells in my research, and I hoped that one of them might help. I instructed Elena to gather certain herbs and items from the village, while I stayed with Ian, trying to keep him calm. As the blood moon rose, its crimson light bathed the forest in an eerie glow. Ian's transformation accelerated, his body contorting and shifting into that of a beast. I began the ritual, chanting ancient words and creating a protective circle around him. The air crackled with energy, and I could feel the power of the curse fighting against the ritual. Ian's growls grew louder, but I pressed on, determined to save him. Elena returned with the items, and we worked together to complete the ritual. For a moment, it seemed like the curse might be broken. Ian's transformation halted, and his eyes regained some of their humanity. But then, with a final, agonized howl, he succumbed to the curse. The beast within him took over, and he lunged at us. We barely managed to escape, fleeing back to the village as the howls of the werewolves echoed through the night. The villagers had taken refuge in their homes, bolting their doors and windows. I knew we had to warn them, but it was too late. Blood Moon's curse had awakened, and the werewolves were on the hunt. Over the next few days, the village was in chaos. The werewolves terrorized the villagers, their attacks swift and brutal. Maria and her family helped organize a defense, but we were vastly outnumbered. It seemed like the curse would consume us all. In a desperate bid to end the bloodshed, I sought out the ancient texts in the chapel. I discovered a passage that spoke of a sacred relic hidden in the mountains, a relic that could potentially break the curse. With the villagers' help, I embarked on a perilous journey to find it. The trek through the mountains was grueling, the terrain unforgiving, and the weather harsh. But we pressed on, driven by the hope of saving our village. After days of searching, we found the relic, a beautifully crafted amulet with intricate designs and symbols of protection. We returned to the village, where the werewolf attacks had intensified. With the amulet in hand, I performed the ritual once more, this time invoking the power of the relic. The air hummed with energy, and the blood moon's light seemed to dim. The werewolves, caught in the ritual's power, began to revert to their human forms. Ian, too, was among them, his eyes filled with gratitude and relief. The curse was broken, and the village was saved. The villagers celebrated, their fear replaced with joy and hope. I left the village with a sense of accomplishment, having uncovered the truth behind the blood moon's curse and helping to end its terror. But I knew that my journey was far from over. There were still many legends to uncover, and many more mysteries to solve. As I looked back at the village one last time, I felt a deep connection to the people and their history. The blood moon's curse had been a dark chapter, but it had also brought out the strength and resilience of the villagers. And as I continued my travels, I carried their story with me, a reminder of the power of hope and the enduring spirit of humanity. My name is Clara, and I used to be a journalist for a big city newspaper. My beat was the strange and unexplained, which led me to some pretty unusual stories. But none of them could compare to what I experienced in the remote village of Dunhaven. It started with an anonymous tip about a series of gruesome murders in the village. The police had no leads, and the locals were terrified. The tipster claimed that the murders were the work of a werewolf. Skeptical but intrigued, I decided to investigate. Dunhaven was a small, isolated village in the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by dense forests and rugged hills. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were met with suspicion. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. The villagers went about their business with haunted looks, and doors were bolted shut as soon as the sun set. I checked into the only inn in town, run by a gruff but kind woman named Moira. She seemed wary of me at first, but when I explained that I was a journalist looking into the murders, she softened a bit. "You won't find many here willing to talk about it," she warned me. "But if you're determined, you should speak to Father McGregor. He's the village priest and knows more about the old legends than anyone." The next day, I visited the church. Father McGregor was an elderly man with a kind face, though his eyes were filled with sorrow. He invited me into his study, where the walls were lined with dusty old books and religious artifacts. "The people here are deeply troubled," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "They believe that the murders are the work of a lycanthropia werewolf. It's an old legend in these parts, but until recently it was just thought a legend." I asked him to tell me more about the legend. He explained that, according to local folklore, a man named Duncan McAllister had been cursed to become a werewolf centuries ago. Duncan had been a feared and respected warrior, but he had also been ruthless and cruel. After he was accused of a heinous crime, a vengeful witch had cursed him to transform into a beast under the full moon. For years, Duncan terrorized the village, killing livestock and people alike. Father McGregor continued. The villagers eventually managed to trap him and bury him in a hidden grave. But every 100 years, the curse is said to awaken, and a new werewolf emerges to continue the cycle of terror. The current murders had started a few months ago, around the time of the full moon. The victims had all been found with their throats ripped out, their bodies mutilated. The descriptions matched the old tales of werewolf attacks. Father McGregor agreed to show me the supposed burial site of Duncan McAllister. It was deep in the forest, a place overgrown with weeds and marked by an ancient, weathered stone. As we stood there, I felt a chill in the air, as if the ground itself held some dark secret. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with thoughts of the legend and the possibility that it could be real. Around midnight, I heard a commotion outside. Peering through the window, I saw a group of villagers, armed with torches and weapons, heading into the forest. I quickly dressed and followed them, keeping a safe distance. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The villagers moved with purpose, their faces set with grim determination. As we neared the burial site, I heard a low growl. Suddenly, a massive, shadowy figure lunged at the group. It was a werewolf, its eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity. The villagers fought bravely, but the beast was too powerful. It slashed and bit, leaving a trail of blood and destruction. I hid behind a tree, my heart pounding in my chest. The scene was like something out of a nightmare. Eventually, the werewolf retreated into the darkness, leaving the villagers to tend to their wounded and dead. The next day, I found Moira and asked her about the villagers who had been attacked. She was shaken, but she told me that they were part of an old order, sworn to protect the village from the werewolf. They had been searching for a way to break the curse for generations. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about the curse and the old legends. I discovered that there was a ritual that could potentially break the curse. But it required a rare and dangerous herb that grew only in the highest parts of the mountains. Determined to end the cycle of terror, I decided to find the herb. Father McGregor offered to accompany me, and together we set out on a treacherous journey into the mountains. The climb was grueling, and the weather was harsh, but we pressed on, driven by the hope of saving the village. After days of searching, we finally found the herb. We returned to Dunhaven, where the villagers had prepared for the next full moon. With the help of Father McGregor and the villagers, I performed the ritual at Duncan McAllister's grave. As the full moon rose, we waited in tense silence. The air was thick with anticipation. Suddenly, a chilling howl echoed through the forest. The werewolf appeared, but this time, something was different. It seemed hesitant, as if the ritual was affecting it. The werewolf lunged at us, but as it crossed the boundary of the ritual circle, it was repelled by an invisible force. The villagers fought bravely, and with the combined power of the ritual and their determination, we managed to subdue the beast. To our astonishment, the werewolf began to transform back into a human. It was a young man, no older than 20, with eyes filled with confusion and fear. He was Duncan McAllister's descendant, cursed to continue the cycle of terror. The villagers took him in, and with Father McGregor's guidance, they helped him adjust to his new life. The curse had been broken, and the village of Dunhaven could finally find peace. I left the village with a sense of accomplishment, knowing that I had helped put an end to a centuries-old curse. The experience had changed me, deepening my belief in the supernatural and the power of human resilience. As I continued my career as a journalist, I carried the story of Dunhaven with me, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit and the hope that even the darkest curses can be broken. I always thought werewolves were just myth tales spun to scare children into behaving. My perspective changed dramatically after what I experienced in the small town of Lockhart. My name is Ryan, and I was an anthropology graduate student at the time, researching folklore and legends. My quest for knowledge led me to one of the most harrowing encounters of my life. It began with an old journal I found in the university library. The journal belonged to a 19th century scholar named Dr. William Hargrave, who had traveled extensively in search of cryptids and mythical creatures. One entry in particular caught my attention: a detailed account of a werewolf sighting in Lockhart, a remote village nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Intrigued, I decided to investigate. I packed my bags and drove to Lockhart, eager to uncover the truth behind Dr. Hargrave's writings. The town was quaint and charming, with a population of only a few hundred people. The locals were friendly, albeit a bit reserved when I mentioned the werewolf legend. I checked into a bed and breakfast run by a kindly older woman named Mrs. Henderson. She welcomed me warmly, but grew visibly uneasy when I brought up the subject of werewolves. "You're better off not poking around in things, best left alone," she advised. "Lockhart has its secrets, and some of them are better kept buried." Undeterred, I continued my research. I visited the local library, where I found more references to werewolves in old newspapers and town records. The sightings were sporadic but consistent, with reports of livestock mutilations and unexplained disappearances dating back over a century. One name kept popping up in my research: Cobb Turner. He was mentioned in several articles as a local recluse, and the town's go-to expert on the werewolf legend. According to the records, Jacob had been living in Lockhart for over 60 years, which seemed improbable given his appearance in photos that spanned decades without any sign of aging. Determined to speak with Jacob, I asked around town, and eventually found his cabin, situated on the outskirts of Lockhart, deep in the woods. The cabin was rustic but well maintained, surrounded by tall trees and an air of isolation. I knocked on the door, and a moment later, it creaked open to reveal a tall, thin man, with piercing blue eyes and a full head of silver hair. He studied me intently before inviting me inside. Jacob's cabin was filled with books, maps, and artifacts from various cultures and eras. He seemed genuinely interested in my research and agreed to share his knowledge with me. "The werewolf legend is more than just a story," he began. "It's a curseon that's plagued Lockhart for generations. The creature is real, and it hunts during the full moon." He explained that the werewolf was a member of the Turner family, cursed to transform into a beast under the full moon's light. The curse had been passed down through the generations, with each new werewolf inheriting the curse upon the death of the previous one. Jacob's knowledge was vast and detailed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was holding something back. When I pressed him on the matter, he grew evasive and ended our conversation abruptly. That night, I returned to the bed and breakfast, my mind racing with questions. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I walked through the quiet streets, I heard a low growl behind me. I turned around, and there, standing in the middle of the road, was a massive, hulking figure. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its breath came out in ragged, steamy puffs. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was face to face with a werewolf. I ran as fast as I could, the creature hot on my heels. I darted through alleyways and backyards, trying to lose it, but it was relentless. Just when I thought I was done for, Jacob appeared out of nowhere, brandishing a silver knife. He lunged at the werewolf, slashing at its side. The creature howled in pain and retreated into the shadows. Jacob turned to me, his face grim. "You need to leave now," he ordered. "It's not safe here." We made our way back to his cabin, where he revealed the truth. Jacob was the current werewolf, cursed to transform under the full moon. He had been trying to find a way to break the curse for decades, but every attempt had ended in failure. "The curse is tied to the bloodline," he explained. "As long as a Turner lives, the werewolf will continue to exist." Jacob had tried to isolate himself to protect the townspeople, but the beast's hunger was too great. He had hoped that my research might uncover something he had missed, but it seemed that breaking the curse was an impossible task. Desperate to help, I suggested a ritual I had read about in Dr. Hargrave's journal. It required a rare herb that grew only in the highest peaks of the mountains, and the participation of the cursed individual during the full moon. With the next full moon only days away, we set out on a perilous journey to find the herb. The climb was treacherous, and the weather was harsh, but we pressed on, driven by the hope of ending Jacob's torment. We finally found the herb and returned to Lockhart just in time. On the night of the full moon, we prepared the ritual at the edge of the forest. Jacob stood in the center of the circle, holding the herb in his hands. As the moon rose, Jacob began to transform. His body contorted and grew, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. But instead of attacking, he remained within the circle, his human consciousness struggling to stay in control. I chanted the incantation from Dr. Hargrave's journal, praying that it would work. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath us trembled. Suddenly, a blinding light enveloped Jacob, and he let out a final, anguished howl. When the light faded, Jacob lay on the ground, human once more. The curse had been broken. The townspeople were cautious at first, but eventually welcomed Jacob back into the community. The fear that had gripped Lockhart for generations began to dissipate, and a sense of peace settled over the town. I returned to the university with a new understanding of the power of folklore and the resilience of the human spirit. The experience had changed me, deepening my belief in the supernatural and the bonds that tie us to our ancestors. As I continued my studies, I carried the story of Jacob and Lockhart with me, a testament to the enduring strength of hope and the possibility of redemption even in the face of the most ancient and terrifying curses. My name is Elena, and I used to be a journalist for a small-town newspaper in the Midwest. My career revolved around local events, human interest stories, and the occasional scandal. I never thought I'd be writing about a werewolf, but life has a way of surprising you. It all started when I received an anonymous tip about strange happenings in a place called Birch Hollow, a tiny village surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. The tip mentioned livestock mutilations, mysterious disappearances, and sightings of a large, wolf-like creature. Sensing a potential big story, I decided to investigate. Birch Hollow was a picturesque community with quaint cottages, a charming town square, and friendly residents. It felt like stepping into another era, far removed from the hustle and bustle of modern life. The villagers, though hospitable, were tight-lipped about the recent events. They exchanged uneasy glances and quickly changed the subject. Whenever I brought up the creature, I stayed at the only inn in town, run by a man named Harold. He was in his 50s, with a warm demeanor and an air of authority that made me think he might know more than he was letting on. One evening, over a glass of whiskey, he opened up. "You're here about the beast, aren't you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized me. I nodded, eager for any information he could provide. Harold sighed and leaned back in his chair. "The stories have been around for generations. They say it's a werewolf, cursed to roam these woods every full moon. Most folks don't believe it, but after what I've seen, I'm not so sure anymore." He recounted tales of cattle torn apart, howls echoing through the night, and a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the forest. The most chilling part was the disappearance vanishing without a trace, often during the full moon. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the town's history. The local library had records dating back to the 1800s, filled with accounts of the werewolf. One name stood out: Annabel Carter, woman accused of witchcraft and executed in 1820. According to the legend, she cursed the village with her dying breath, condemning it to be haunted by the beast. As I dug deeper, I found references to a descendant of Annabel's, a man named Lucas Carter. Lucas lived on the outskirts of town in a rundown farmhouse. If anyone knew the truth about the curse, it would be him. I made my way to Lucas's home, a dilapidated structure surrounded by overgrown vegetation. The air was thick with tension as I knocked on the door. It creaked open to reveal a middle-aged man with unkempt hair and a weary expression. Lucas was initially reluctant to talk, but he eventually relented, perhaps seeing the determination in my eyes. He confirmed the family curse, passed down through the generations. Each Carter heir was doomed to transform into a werewolf under the full moon, driven by an insatiable hunger. "I've tried everything to break the curse," he said, his voice tinged with despair. "But nothing works. The beast is too powerful." I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Lucas. He was a prisoner in his own body, forced to endure the horrors of the transformation month after month. As the next full moon approached, I knew I had to witness the transformation for myself. Lucas reluctantly agreed to let me stay, hoping my presence might somehow help. The night of the full moon was eerily quiet. The sky was clear, the moon shining brightly, casting long shadows across the landscape. Lucas had chained himself in the basement, a precaution he took every month. I sat in a corner, notebook in hand, heart pounding in anticipation. As the moon reached its zenith, Lucas began to convulse, his body contorting in unnatural ways. His eyes glowed with a feral intensity, and he let out a guttural growl. Within minutes, he had transformed into a massive, terrifying werewolf. The chains held, but barely. The beast thrashed and howled, straining against its restraints. It was a horrifying sight, but also strangely mesmerizing. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from upstairs. Someone had broken into the house. I ran up to find Harold, armed with a shotgun, standing in the doorway. "I knew you'd be here," he said, his voice cold. "It's time to end this." Before I could react, he fired a shot, narrowly missing the werewolf. The beast roared in fury, breaking free from its chains. It lunged at Harold, knocking him to the ground. The two struggled, but the werewolf's strength was overwhelming. In the chaos, I grabbed a silver knife I had found in Lucas's collection of artifacts. Remembering the legends, I knew it was the only thing that could kill the werewolf. With trembling hands, I plunged the knife into the beast's side. It let out a final, agonized howl before collapsing. As the life drained from its eyes, it transformed back into Lucas. He looked at me, a mixture of relief and gratitude in his gaze, before he took his last breath. Harold survived, albeit with severe injuries. The townspeople were shocked by the events, but also relieved that the curse had finally been lifted. They buried Lucas with respect, acknowledging the torment he had endured. I returned to my newspaper with a story like no other. It was a tale of curses, bravery, and redemption, one that would be told and retold for generations. My encounter with the werewolf of Birch Hollow had changed me, opening my eyes to the mysteries and horrors that lurk in the shadows of our world. My name is David, and I used to be a park ranger in a small national park in the Midwest. My career revolved around preserving nature, guiding tourists, and ensuring the safety of wildlife. I never thought I'd be dealing with a werewolf, But life has a way of throwing curveballs. It all started when I received reports of strange animal attacks in the deeper parts of the park. Livestock was being mutilated, campers were hearing eerie howls at night, and there were sightings of a large, wolf-like creature. Intrigued and concerned, I decided to investigate. The park was a sprawling expanse of dense forests, winding trails, and hidden clearings. It seemed like the perfect setting for a supernatural encounter. The regular visitors were polite but concerned, especially when I mentioned the recent attacks. I set up camp in a remote area known for the sightings. The nights were quiet, except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. But on the third night, everything changed. As the full moon rose high in the sky, an eerie silence fell over the forest. The usual night sound ceased, replaced by an oppressive stillness. I heard it thin a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured out of my tent, heart pounding. The beam of my flashlight caught a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. Slowly, the creature emerged from the shadows. It was massive, standing on two legs, with matted fur and a snout full of sharp teeth. It was unmistakably a werewolf. I stood frozen, trying to process the reality of what I was seeing. The werewolf growled again, its eyes locked onto me. Just as it was about to lunge, a sharp whistle pierced the air. The creature hesitated, then turned and fled into the woods. I followed the sound of the whistle to find an elderly man standing at the edge of a clearing. He was tall and thin, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He introduced himself as Thomas, a local historian and folklorist. Thomas explained that the werewolf was part of a centuries-old curse that had plagued the area. According to legend, a Native American shaman had cursed a settler family for desecrating sacred land. The curse caused one member of each generation to transform into a werewolf on the night of the full moon. Homas believed the current werewolf was a man named Jacob, a descendant of the original cursed family. Jacob lived in a cabin deep in the woods, isolated from the rest of the world. Determined to break the curse, Thomas had spent years researching and preparing for this moment. Together, we devised a plan to confront Jacob and lift the curse. Thomas believed that a ritual involving a specific set of herbs, a silver dagger, and the light of the full moon could break the curse. We gathered the necessary ingredients and set off for Jacob's cabin. The journey was arduous, the forest dense and unyielding. As night fell, we reached the cabin. It was a small, decrepit structure, barely standing. We could hear Jacob's anguished cries from inside. He was in the throes of transformation. Thomas and I burst into the cabin to find Jacob writhing on the floor, half man, half beast. Thomas began the ritual, chanting in an ancient language, while I held the silver dagger, ready to strike if necessary. Jacob's transformation slowed, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, I saw a flicker of humanity in his gaze. Thomas's chanting grew louder, the air thick with tension. Finally, with a final, powerful chant, Thomas completed the ritual. A blinding light filled the cabin, and Jacob let out a final, agonized howl. When the light faded, Jacob lay on the floor, fully human, tears streaming down his face. The curse had been broken. Jacob was weak, but grateful. He told us about his lonely life, living in fear of the full moon, and his relief at finally being free. We helped him back to town, where he was welcomed with open arms. My encounter with the werewolf and the breaking of the curse changed me. It opened my eyes to the hidden mysteries of the world and the power of ancient traditions. I returned to my duties as a park ranger, but with a newfound respect for the supernatural. Life in the park went back to normal, but I knew that the memory of that night would stay with me forever. My name is Mia, and I used to work as a wildlife biologist in the rugged mountains of Colorado. My job was my passione love studying animals in their natural habitat, tracking their movements, and ensuring their survival. But nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare I was about to face. It started with a series of mysterious disappearances. Local farmers reported missing livestock, and hikers went missing without a trace. Rumors of a giant wolf prowling the mountains at night began to circulate. As a scientist, I was skeptical, but the sheer number of reports piqued my curiosity. One evening, I decided to set up a camera trap in an area known for strange sightings. The forest was dense, the air crisp with the smell of pine and earth. As the sun set, I felt a sense of unease creep in, but I brushed it off as nerves. The following morning, retrieved the camera and reviewed the footage. My heart skipped a beat when I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring directly into the lens, followed by a large, shadowy figure moving swiftly through the trees. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I enlisted the help of my colleague, Sam, a seasoned tracker. Together, we ventured deeper into the forest, armed with cameras, tranquilizer guns, and our wits. As night fell, the forest seemed to come alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. We set up camp near a rocky outcrop, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive beast. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. Suddenly, a blood-curdling howl echoed through the trees. We exchanged nervous glances, gripping our tranquilizer guns tightly. Out of the shadows emerged a massive creature, towering over us. It had the body of a man, but the head and fur of a wolf. Its eyes glowed a menacing yellow, and its snout was lined with sharp teeth. This was no ordinary animal, it was a werewolf. Before we could react, the creature lunged at us. Sam fired a tranquilizer dart, but it barely slowed the werewolf down. I grabbed a flare and lit it, the bright light momentarily blinding the beast. We took the opportunity to flee, running blindly through the forest. We stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin and took refuge inside. The werewolf's howls grew louder as it closed in on us. In a desperate attempt to barricade the door, we found a dusty old book filled with strange symbols and incantations. Sam, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as nonsense, but I felt a strange pull towards it. As the werewolf battered the door, I began to read the incantations aloud. The air around us seemed to crackle with energy, and the werewolf's howls turned to roars of pain. With the final incantation, a blinding light enveloped the cabin, and the creature's roars ceased. When the light faded, the werewolf was gone. In its place lay a man, unconscious, but alive. We cautiously approached him, and as he came to, he explained his tragic tale. His name was Ethan, and he had been cursed many years ago. Every full moon, he transformed into the monstrous werewolf, losing control of his actions. Ethan had tried everything to break the curse, but nothing worked. He had isolated himself in the mountains to protect others from his monstrous alter ego. The book of incantations we found was left by a previous victim of the curse, who had failed to lift it. With a newfound determination, we decided to help Ethan. We researched the origins of the curse, and discovered it was linked to an ancient ritual, involving a rare flower that only bloomed under the light of a blood moon. The next blood moon was weeks away, so we prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary ingredients. When the night of the blood moon arrived, we ventured to the top of the highest peak, where the flower was said to bloom. The journey was treacherous, but we pressed on, driven by our desire to free Ethan from his torment. At the peak, under the eerie red glow of the blood moon, we found the flower. We performed the ritual, using the incantations from the book and the flower's essence. As we completed the ritual, a surge of energy erupted from Ethan, enveloping him in light. When the light faded, Ethan was no longer a werewolf. The curse had been lifted, and he was free. He thanked us with tears in his eyes, grateful for his second chance at life. We escorted him back to civilization, where he could start anew. My encounter with the werewolf changed me. It taught me that sometimes, the line between myth and reality is thinner than we think. I returned to my work as a wildlife biologist, but with a deeper understanding of the mysteries that lurk in the shadows. And though the mountains were peaceful once more, I knew that the memory of that night would stay with me forever. My name is Sam, and I used to be a detective in a quiet town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains. My career revolved around solving mundane cases of theft, domestic disputes, and the occasional missing person. I never thought I'd be investigating a werewolf, but life has a way of defying expectations. It all started with a series of gruesome attacks. Bodies were found mutilated, with deep claw marks and bite wounds. The local community was in a state of panic, and rumors of a beast prowling the woods began to spread. As the lead detective, I was tasked with solving the mystery. The first victim was a young woman named Jessica. Her body was discovered near a hiking trail, and the sight was horrifying. Her limbs were torn apart, and her face was frozen in a look of terror. The forensic team couldn't identify any animal known to the area, and the attacks didn't match the pattern of any known predators. Determined to find answers, I delved into the town's history. I discovered that similar attacks had occurred over a century ago, leading to the disappearance of several townsfolk. The old newspaper clippings mentioned a wolfman responsible for the killings, but the case was never solved. One evening, I received an anonymous tip that led me to an old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town. The building was decrepit, its windows shattered, and the air thick with the smell of decay. Inside, I found a series of cryptic symbols etched into the walls and an ancient book on lycanthropy. The book was filled with accounts of werewolves, their transformations, and how they were cursed to roam the earth. It mentioned a ritual that could potentially cure a werewolf, involving a rare herb that only grew in a secluded part of the forest. Intrigued and desperate for answers, I decided to find the herb and perform the ritual. As I was about to leave, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to find a man standing in the shadows. He introduced himself as Ethan, a local historian who had been researching the town's dark past. He believed the werewolf attacks were linked to a curse placed on the town centuries ago. Ethan and I joined forces, combining our knowledge and resources. We scoured the forest for the rare herb, all the while keeping an eye out for any signs of the beast. As the full moon approached, the tension in town grew palpable. People locked their doors and windows, fearing the next attack. One night, while we were deep in the woods, we heard a blood-curdling howl. The werewolf was close. We followed the sound, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we approached a clearing, we saw it a massive creature with glowing yellow eyes and sharp, blood-stained claws. It was standing over another victim, tearing into their flesh. Ethan and I stood frozen, unable to comprehend the horror before us. The werewolf turned its gaze towards us, and I saw a flicker of recognition in its eyes. It lunged at us, but we managed to evade its attack. In the chaos, Ethan was injured, but we managed to drive the beast away with a flare gun. We hurried back to town, where we tended to Ethan's wounds. He told me that the werewolf was once a man named Lucas, who had been cursed by a vengeful witch. The curse was tied to the lunar cycle, and only the ritual mentioned in the book could break it. With renewed determination, we gathered the necessary ingredients and prepared for the ritual. On the night of the full moon, we ventured back into the forest, armed with silver bullets and the rare herb. We found the werewolf in the same clearing, its transformation almost complete. As Ethan began the ritual, I kept the werewolf at bay, firing silver bullets to weaken it. The beast howled in pain, its eyes filled with rage and sorrow. With the final incantation, Ethan completed the ritual. A blinding light enveloped the werewolf, and when it faded, Lucas lay on the ground, human once more. Lucas was weak but conscious. He thanked us for freeing him from the curse, tears streaming down his face. He told us about his tragic past, how the witch had cursed him for an old family feud, and how he had lived in torment for centuries. We brought him back to town, where he was given a chance to start anew. My encounter with the werewolf changed me. It opened my eyes to the hidden supernatural elements in the world and the power of ancient curses. I continued my work as a detective, but with a deeper understanding of the mysteries that lay beneath the surface. The town gradually returned to normal, but the memory of that night, and the werewolf's lament, would stay with me forever. My name is Megan, and I used to work as a park ranger in the vast and rugged terrains of Utah. My job was usually peaceful, revolving around guiding tourists, ensuring safety, and preserving the natural beauty of the park. However, my tranquil routine was shattered by an encounter that defied logic and forever changed my perception of reality. The Navajo Nation reservation bordered the park where I worked, and local legends were an integral part of the community's culture. Stories of Skinwalker sitchies who could transform into animals were whispered among the residents, but I always dismissed them as mere folklore. That changed one fateful autumn evening. It started with reports of strange occurrences. Visitors complained of eerie noises at night, shadows that seemed to follow them, and the feeling of being watched. Some claimed to have seen animals behaving unusually, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The park staff was baffled, and I was tasked with investigating these disturbances. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, I ventured into a particularly remote area of the park. The air was crisp, and the silence was almost deafening. Armed with my flashlight and a sense of duty, I began my patrol. As I walked deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Suddenly, heard a rustling noise behind me. I turned, shining my flashlight in the direction of the sound, but saw nothing. My heart raced as I continued, every sense on high alert. Then, I saw a figure lurking in the shadows. It was humanoid, but moved with an animalistic grace. Its eyes glowed an eerie yellow, and its skin was a sickly pale. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized I was staring at a skinwalker. The creature began to advance towards me, its movements fluid and predatory. I backed away, a flashlight trembling in my hand. I tried to radio for help, but the static was all I could hear. Panic set in as the skinwalker closed the distance between us. In a desperate bid for survival, I turned and ran, my footsteps pounding against the forest floor. The skinwalker let out a guttural growl and gave chase. I could hear its footsteps behind me, getting closer with each passing second. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they would give out, but I pushed on, fueled by sheer terror. Just as I thought I couldn't run any longer, stumbled into a clearing. The moonlight bathed the area in a pale glow, and I could see a small cabin in the distance. Summoning the last of my strength, I sprinted towards it, hoping it would offer some semblance of safety. I burst through the cabin door, slamming it shut behind me. The interior was dimly lit, and the air was thick with the scent of herbs and incense. An elderly Navajo woman stood before me, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and understanding. She motioned for me to sit down and began to chant softly. The skinwalker scratched at the door, its growls echoing through the cabin. The woman continued her chant, sprinkling a mixture of herbs around the room. Gradually, the growls subsided, and the scratching stopped. The air grew still, and a sense of calm settled over the cabin. The woman introduced herself as Eliza, a medicine woman who had lived on the reservation her entire life. She explained that the skinwalker was a corrupted soul, twisted by dark magic, and driven by a thirst for power. She had been protecting the park from the creature for years, but it had grown bolder and more dangerous. Eliza taught me about the rituals and protections used to ward off skinwalkers. She gave me a pouch of sacred herbs and a talisman to wear around my neck. She also warned me that the skinwalker would not give up easily, and that I had to be vigilant. Over the next few weeks, I followed Eliza's instructions, performing the rituals and keeping the talisman close. The eerie occurrences continued, but I felt a renewed sense of strength and determination. I was no longer alone in this fight. One night, as I patrolled the park, I felt the familiar sensation of being watched. I turned to find the Skinwalker standing at the edge of the clearing, its yellow eyes glowing with malice. This time, I was prepared. I held up the talisman and began to chant the words Eliza had taught me. The Skinwalker snarled and lunged at me, but I stood my ground. The talisman glowed with a brilliant light, and the creature recoiled, its form flickering between human and animal. With a final, blood-curdling scream, the Skinwalker dissolved into the night, leaving behind only a faint whisper on the wind. The park gradually returned to normal, the strange occurrences ceasing as the Skinwalker's influence waned. Eliza and I remained in contact, and I continued to learn from her wisdom and experience. My encounter with the Skinwalker had changed me, but it also strengthened my resolve to protect the park and its visitors from any threat, no matter how supernatural. Looking back, I realized that the legends of the Navajo people were not just stories, but warnings and lessons passed down through generations. My experience had opened my eyes to the hidden dangers that lurked in the shadows, and the power of ancient traditions and knowledge. And though the scars of that encounter would never fully heal, I knew that I was stronger for having faced the Skinwalker and survived. My name is Nathaniel, and I used to be an archaeologist specializing in Native American artifacts. My work took me to various remote and often untouched areas of North America, where I would uncover relics of past civilizations and piece together their stories. Little did I know that one such expedition would lead me to a harrowing encounter with a creature I never believed existed. It was early spring when my team and I received permission to explore a secluded region of the Appalachian Mountains. The area was rumored to be rich in artifacts from the Cherokee tribe, and we were eager to document and preserve any findings. We set up our base camp near a dense forest, a place locals avoided due to its reputation for strange occurrences and eerie howls at night. The first few days were uneventful. We found some pottery shards and tools, but nothing extraordinary. However, on the fifth day, we stumbled upon an ancient cave hidden behind a thick curtain of ivy. The entrance was narrow and dark, exuding an air of mystery and foreboding. Our excitement overshadowed any apprehension as we prepared to explore its depths. Inside, the cave walls were adorned with intricate carvings and symbols, telling stories of gods, spirits, and legendary creatures. One depiction, in particular, caught my eye: a monstrous figure with the body of a man and the head of a wolf, standing over a group of terrified villagers. The inscription below read, Uktane, a name associated with the mythical horned serpent, but not a werewolf. Intrigued, I took numerous photographs and notes, intending to research this anomaly further. That night, as we gathered around the campfire, we shared our findings and speculated about the cave's significance. Our Cherokee guide, Jace, was unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on the flames. Sensing his discomfort, I asked him if he knew anything about the Uktana depicted as a wolf. Jace hesitated before speaking. The Uktana is a powerful spirit, but what you saw is not it. The creature in the cave is a Nununuia Skinwalker. It is said to be a shaman who transformed into a beast through dark magic. Such creatures are rare and dangerous, and it is best not to disturb their resting places. His words sent a chill down my spine, but the rational part of me dismissed it as superstition. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that settled over our camp. As the night grew darker, strange noises echoed from the forest low growls and the rustling of leaves. We all tried to brush it off as wildlife, but deep down, we knew something was watching us. The following day, we returned to the cave to continue our exploration. This time, we ventured deeper, discovering a hidden chamber filled with ancient relics. Among them was a large, intricately carved stone amulet. It was unlike anything we had ever seen, and its craftsmanship suggested it held great significance. As I carefully lifted it, the ground trembled, and a chilling howl resonated through the cave. We decided to leave the cave and return to our camp, planning to document and analyze our findings the next day. That night, The howls grew louder and closer. The air was thick with tension, and sleep eluded us. Just past midnight, the howling ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. We heard heavy footsteps approaching our camp, followed by a guttural growl. Emerging from the shadows was a massive creature man, half wolf, with eyes that glowed like embers. It stood on two legs, towering over us, its fur matted and its fangs bared. The Skinwalker had awakened, and it was angry. Panic ensued as we scrambled for our gear. Jace began chanting in Cherokee, his voice strong and steady despite the terror in his eyes. The Skinwalker lunged at us, but Jace's chant seemed to create a barrier, holding it back momentarily. He shouted for us to run, and we didn't need to be told twice. We fled into the forest, the creature hot on our heels. Branches tore at our clothes and skin as we stumbled through the underbrush, the Skinwalker's howls growing more frenzied. We reached a clearing where Jace instructed us to form a circle. He drew symbols in the dirt and continued chanting, his voice a beacon of hope amid the chaos. The Skinwalker circled us, snarling and snapping, but it couldn't breach the protective circle Jace had created. With every word he spoke, the creature seemed to weaken, its form flickering between man and beast. Finally, with a final, desperate howl, the Skinwalker collapsed and dissolved into a mist that dissipated into the night. We stood there, breathless and shaken, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Jace explained that the amulet we had taken was a powerful artifact that bound the Skinwalker to the cave. By removing it, we had inadvertently freed the creature. The next morning, we returned the amulet to the cave and sealed the entrance, ensuring that no one would disturb it again. Our expedition was cut short, and we left the mountains with more questions than answers. My encounter with the Skinwalker left an indelible mark on my soul. A constant reminder that some legends are born from truths too terrifying to ignore. Back in the safety of my home, I researched everything I could about Skinwalkers and the Cherokee legends. The experience had shattered my skepticism, opening my mind to the possibility that the supernatural could indeed exist. The haunting memories of that night in the Appalachian Mountains still lingered. But they also fueled my determination to respect and preserve the ancient cultures and their stories. I continued my work as an archaeologist, but with a newfound reverence for the past and its mysteries. The encounter with the Skinwalker had changed me, and I knew I would never view the world the same way again. My name is Isabel, and I used to be a park ranger at a national forest in Colorado. My job was to protect the wilderness, guide hikers, and ensure that the natural beauty of the forest remained unspoiled. I loved my work and the sense of peace it brought me. But one night, everything changed, and I found myself facing a horror I had only read about in folklore. It was late autumn, and the forest was ablaze with the vibrant colors of fallen leaves. The days were getting shorter, and the nights were growing colder. I had just finished my evening rounds, and was preparing to settle in for the night, when a call came through the radio. A group of campers had reported strange noises and sightings of large, shadowy figures near their campsite. Concerned, I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to investigate. The campsite was located deep in the forest, about an hour's hike from the ranger station. As I made my way through the woods, the moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the landscape. The air was crisp, and every rustle of leaves seemed amplified in the silence. When I arrived at the campsite, the campers were huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. One of the campers, a man in his 30s, stepped forward. "We've been hearing howling really close, and we saw something moving in the trees. It was big, like a wolf, but standing on two legs." A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to reassure them. "It's probably just a bear or a large animal. I'll take a look around. Stay here and keep the fire going." With my flashlight in hand, I ventured into the darkness, the beam cutting through the thick foliage. The howling they mentioned was faint but unmistakable, echoing through the trees. I followed the sound, my heart pounding with each step. After a few minutes, I came across a clearing, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Standing in the moonlight was a creature unlike any I had ever seen. It was tall, towering over 7 feet, with the body of a man, but covered in thick, dark fur. Its head was that of a wolf, with glowing yellow eyes and long, sharp fangs. The creature let out a low growl, and I instinctively took a step back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Suddenly, it lunged at me, moving with incredible speed. I barely had time to react, diving to the side as it crashed into the spot where I had been standing. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my heart racing as the creature gave chase. The forest was a blur as I darted between trees, the howls growing louder and more frenzied behind me. I reached the campsite, breathless and terrified. "We need to leave now," I shouted. The campers didn't hesitate. We grabbed our things and ran, the sounds of the creature's pursuit echoing in our ears. We made our way to the nearest ranger station, where we barricaded ourselves inside. The howling continued outside, but the creature didn't attempt to break it. It seemed content to let us know it was still there, waiting. The next morning, the howling had stopped, and the forest was eerily quiet. I reported the incident to my superiors, but they were skeptical. There were no tracks, no evidence of the creature's existence, only my word and the frightened accounts of the campers. Despite their doubts, they agreed to temporarily close off the area and investigate. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, and every rustle of leaves sent a wave of fear through me. I began to research local legends and folklore, hoping to find some explanation for what I had encountered. I discovered stories of werewolves, creatures that were said to roam the forests under the light of the full moon. One legend, in particular, stood out. It spoke of the wolves of the red moon, a pack of werewolves that were cursed to wander the earth, seeking vengeance on those who had wronged them. According to the legend, the curse could only be lifted by finding and destroying the talisman that bound them to their fate. The talisman was said to be hidden deep within the forest, guarded by the very creatures it cursed. Determined to put an end to the terror, I decided to find the talisman and break the curse. I gathered supplies and set out into the forest, following the clues from the legend. The journey was perilous, and I often felt the presence of the werewolves watching me from the shadows. After days of searching, I finally found the talisman, a small, intricately carved stone hidden in a cave. As I held the talisman, the ground trembled, and a deafening howl filled the air. The werewolves emerged from the shadows, surrounding me. I knew that destroying the talisman would free them, but it would also unleash their wrath. With no other choice, I smashed the talisman against the cave wall. The werewolves let out a final, agonized howl before collapsing to the ground. Their bodies shimmered and transformed back into human form, their faces peaceful and free from the torment that had bound them. The curse was broken, and the forest was silent once more. I returned to my duties as a park ranger, but the encounter with the werewolves changed me. I gained a newfound respect for the power of ancient curses and the creatures that lurk in the shadows. The forest, once a place of solace, now held a deeper, more mysterious significance. Though I never encountered the werewolves again, the memory of that night and the howls of the red moon will forever haunt my dreams. A reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. My name is Daniel, and I once worked as a wildlife biologist in the Pacific Northwest. My passion for studying animals and their habitats took me deep into remote forests, where I spent countless hours observing and documenting the behaviors of various species. Little did I know that my quest for knowledge would lead me to an encounter with something far beyond the realm of scientific explanation. It was late September, and the days were growing shorter as the leaves turned golden and red. I had been assigned to conduct a survey in Blackwater Woods, a dense forest known for its diverse wildlife and rugged terrain. My task was to monitor the population of wolves in the area. a species that had been reintroduced a few years prior and was showing promising signs of recovery. I set up camp near a small stream and began my work, setting up camera traps and collecting data from previous surveys. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the usual sightings of deer, elk, and the occasional black bear. However, as the full moon approached, I began to notice something unusual. The forest seemed to come alive at night, with the sounds of howling echoing through the trees. At first, I assumed it was the wolves communicating, but the howls were different, more menacing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the reach of my flashlight. One evening, as I was reviewing footage from the camera traps, I noticed a strange figure on one of the recordings. It was large and humanoid, standing on two legs with the body of a wolf. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was it a prank, a trick of the light, or was there something more sinister at play? Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to investigate the area where the figure had been recorded. Armed with my flashlight and a tranquilizer gun, I set out into the darkness, following the trail of paw prints that led deeper into the woods. The howling grew louder as I approached, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. As I entered a clearing, I saw a creature from the footage. It stood over 7 feet tall, with dark fur covering its muscular body and glowing yellow eyes that pierced through the night. It snarled, revealing sharp, glistening fangs. I raised my tranquilizer gun, my hands trembling, but before I could fire, the creature lunged at me with incredible speed. I barely managed to dodge, stumbling backwards and falling to the ground. The creature loomed over me, and I could feel its hot breath on my face. Just as I thought it was the end, a deafening howl rang out from the trees, and the creature paused, its ears twitching. It turned and bolted into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. I lay there, shaken and confused, trying to process what had just happened. I knew I couldn't stay out here alone any longer. I gathered my equipment and hurried back to my campsite, my mind racing with questions. What was that creature, and why did it flee at the sound of the howl? The next morning, I decided to leave Blackwater Woods and report my findings to my colleagues. I packed up my gear and made my way back to the nearest ranger station. Along the way, I encountered an old man named Edgar, who lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of the forest. He was a local legend, known for his knowledge of the land and its mysteries. When I told him about my encounter, his expression grew serious. "You've seen the Guardian," he said, in a low voice. "It's a werewolf that protects this forest. The howl you heard was from another werewolf, its mate. They've been here for generations, keeping the balance of nature." I was skeptical, but Edgar's words resonated with what I had experienced. He explained that the werewolves were not evil, but were bound by a curse to protect the forest from those who would harm it. They were the guardians of Blackwater Woods, and their presence was both a blessing and a curse. Determined to learn more, I spent the next few months researching the legends and history of the area. I discovered old tales of the Guardian and its mate, stories passed down through generations of locals. According to the legend, the werewolves were once human, a couple who had been cursed by a vengeful spirit for trespassing on sacred land. They were transformed into werewolves and tasked with protecting the forest for eternity. My scientific mind struggled to reconcile these legends with reality, but I couldn't deny what I had seen. I returned to Blackwater Woods several times, always careful to respect the land and its guardians. I continued my work, documenting the wildlife and observing the balance of nature that the werewolves maintain. Over time, developed a deep respect for the guardians of Blackwater Woods. They were more than just creatures of legend. They were a vital part of the ecosystem, a testament to the mysteries that still exist in our world. My encounter with them changed me, opening my eyes to the wonders and horrors that lie hidden in the depths of the wilderness. Though I never saw the werewolves again, their presence was always felt, a silent reminder of the guardianship they held over the forest. I continued my work as a wildlife biologist, but with a newfound appreciation for the unknown and the stories that connect us to the land. My name is Daniel, and this is my story. The howling in Blackwater Woods will forever echo in my memory, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the natural world from the supernatural, and the guardians who watch over it from the shadows.